Tom Brady. 7 Super Bowl rings. The greatest quarterback who ever lived. The man who made New England cry when he left and Tampa Bay cry when he retired. A legend so complete and so total that his name alone is enough to end any argument about the greatest of all time in any sport in any era anywhere on the planet. And he just slapped Logan Paul. Joy Behar heard about this and had exactly one reaction. She looked at the camera, she looked at the table, and she said the thing that everyone watching was already thinking but had not quite found the words for. He is too pretty to be a wrestler. 5 words. Perfect. Done. But the story of what happened at Fanatics Fest and what Tom Brady said afterward about getting in the ring and what the View panel said about all of it is considerably more interesting and considerably more revealing than 5 words can contain. Because what happened when Tom Brady started talking about wrestling was not just the story of a retired athlete looking for his next chapter. It was the story of what happens when the greatest of all time decides that greatness is not enough. That the legacy is not enough. That the rings and the records and the name that ends every argument are not enough. That 50 years old and $500 million in the bank and the respect of every person who has ever watched a football game needs something else. Something new. Something that Logan Paul apparently started. This is that story. Tom Brady arrived at Fanatics Fest in New York with the specific quality of presence that Tom Brady brings to every room he enters, which is the quality of someone who has been the most important person in the room for so long that the room reorganizes itself around him before he has said anything. This is not arrogance. This is what genuine greatness does to the air in a space. You feel it before you see it. The other people in the room feel it. The cameras feel it. The crowd that gathered at Fanatics Fest felt it the moment he walked in, and they responded with the specific and immediate recognition of people who understand that they are in the presence of something that does not come along very often. He was supposed to be there for the event. He was supposed to do what retired athletes do at events like this, which is to be gracious and accessible and to give the fans the specific quality of closeness to something legendary that events like this are designed to provide. He was doing all of that. And then Logan Paul happened. Logan Paul is a specific kind of 21st century celebrity that did not exist before the internet made it possible and that the internet has produced in considerable quantity since it became possible, the kind of celebrity whose primary skill is being interesting to a very large number of people without those people being entirely able to explain why they find him interesting, who has built a career out of the specific and modern ability to generate attention through a combination of physical performance and controversy and the willingness to do things that are slightly outside the range of what most people are willing to do in public and to document the doing of those things for an audience that finds the documentation compelling. He is a wrestler. He is an influencer. He is a boxer who has fought Floyd Mayweather. He is the kind of person who exists in the specific cultural space between sport and entertainment and social media that has expanded enormously in the last decade and that the people who grew up before that space existed sometimes struggle to understand fully. He was at Fanatics Fest. He and Tom Brady were in the same room. And something happened. The something that happened was a smack. Logan Paul and Tom Brady got into a physical altercation at Fanatics Fest that was captured on video and that circulated online with the speed that things circulate online when they involve 2 famous people doing something physical to each other in public. It was not a serious altercation. Nobody was hurt. Nobody was going to the hospital. It was the specific kind of physical exchange that happens between men who are performing for cameras and who both understand that the performance is as much a part of what is happening as the physical contact itself. But it was a smack. Tom Brady smacked Logan Paul. Or Logan Paul smacked Tom Brady. The specifics depend on which version of events you find most credible. What is not in dispute is that the 2 of them ended up in a physical exchange that was documented and shared and that generated the specific kind of attention that physical exchanges between famous people generate. And then Tom Brady did the thing that made the View segment happen. He talked about it. He did an interview and he said the words that Joy Behar was going to react to with such precision and such perfect comic timing that the reaction would become more memorable than the original event. He said he was ready to get in the ring. He said he had been waiting for someone to come up with a storyline for him. He said his boy Gronk had done it. He said Logan Paul had done it. He said he thought he could get in there for at least one match. Tom Brady. 7 Super Bowl rings. Greatest of all time. Wanted to get in the wrestling ring. And Joy Behar had exactly one thing to say about that. He is too pretty to be a wrestler. The studio laughed. Of course the studio laughed. Because the line was perfect, not just because it was funny but because it was accurate, because it located with surgical precision the specific and irreducible quality of Tom Brady's public image that made the wrestling ambition simultaneously charming and absurd. Tom Brady is beautiful. This is not a controversial observation. This is one of the most universally acknowledged facts in American popular culture, a fact so thoroughly established and so completely uncontested that it functions as a kind of baseline assumption in any conversation about Tom Brady, the thing that is always already present even when it is not being discussed directly. He is extraordinarily handsome in the specific way that Hollywood handsome works, the symmetrical features and the jaw and the hair and the smile that have made him as visible in fashion contexts as in football contexts, that have put him on magazine covers and in advertising campaigns and in the specific category of public figures who are famous not just for what they do but for how they look while they do it. Joy Behar looked at this and looked at the wrestling ring and said he is too pretty to be a wrestler, and the studio erupted because the eruption was the only available response to something that is simultaneously obvious and perfect, to the specific comedy of the contrast between the Tom Brady who exists and the Tom Brady who apparently wanted to exist inside a wrestling ring. But Joy Behar was not done. Because Joy Behar is never done with just one line when the material provides more. She said something else. She said the thing that was underneath the too pretty observation, the thing that gave the comedy its weight and that made it about more than just the physical quality of Tom Brady's face. She said this whole beef with Logan Paul is so beneath him. And this was the real line. Not because it was funnier than the first one, because it was not. The first one was the comedy and the second one was the substance, and you need both for the moment to be complete. This was the real line because it said the thing that the first line had been pointing at, the thing that was actually interesting about the Tom Brady-Logan Paul situation, which was not the smack or the wrestling ambition or even the comedy of a too pretty man wanting to get into the ring, but the specific and revealing quality of someone who has everything, who has achieved everything that can be achieved in their field, who has the records and the rings and the legacy that puts them beyond comparison, reaching for something smaller and stranger and less significant than what they already have. You were the GOAT, Joy said. You were the greatest of all time. And you are getting into a little slappy fest with an online influencer. It feels so small and weird. Small and weird. 2 words that captured something true about the Tom Brady-Logan Paul situation that the longer analysis could not have captured more efficiently. Because it was small and weird. Not because Logan Paul is not a legitimate figure in the specific cultural space he occupies, not because the wrestling world does not have its own legitimacy and its own audience and its own significance in the broader entertainment landscape. But because Tom Brady is Tom Brady, and the specific distance between what Tom Brady is and what a slap fight with Logan Paul at Fanatics Fest represents is the distance between small and weird and everything else. You do not go from being the greatest athlete in the history of your sport to a slappy fest with an influencer and have the journey feel like a continuation of the story. You go from being the greatest athlete in the history of your sport to a slappy fest with an influencer and it feels like a different story entirely, a story that does not quite fit, that has the characters mixed up, that has put someone in a scene that was written for someone else. Ana Navarro had a different take. Ana always had a different take. She said no risk is a risk. She said people have to get out of their comfort zones. She said otherwise you just go, you have to reinvent every 10 years. And this was also true, in the way that true things that are slightly in conflict with other true things are true, which is to say it was true on its own terms, and it was also missing something, which was the specific distinction between reinventing and diminishing, between the expansion of what you are and the trading of what you are for something smaller that feels like expansion because it is new. Tom Brady reinventing himself is a legitimate and admirable goal. Tom Brady is 50 years old and has $500 million and a platform that most people could not build in multiple lifetimes and a name that opens doors that are closed to everyone else. The question is not whether he should reinvent. The question is whether the wrestling ring with Logan Paul is the reinvention that the name and the platform and the $500 million and the 50 years of living deserve. Joy Behar thought the answer was no. She said it with the specific and perfect economy of the line that says the most with the fewest words, and she said it in a way that made the studio laugh with her and that made the people watching at home nod with the specific recognition of people who had thought the same thing but had not found the language for it until she found it for them. The Gronk reference was its own small comedy. Tom Brady said his boy Gronk had done it, and the mention of Gronk, Rob Gronkowski, Brady's former tight end and one of his closest friends and a man whose public persona has always had a quality of cheerful physical absurdity that made the wrestling crossover feel entirely appropriate for Gronk in a way that it did not feel entirely appropriate for Brady, was itself a piece of information about the situation that Joy Behar's line had already illuminated without the need for Gronk to be mentioned. Gronk in the wrestling ring is funny and fitting and completely in character for a man whose entire public identity had always contained the specific playfulness that makes the absurd feel natural. Tom Brady in the wrestling ring is something else, is the specific and slightly uncomfortable quality of someone doing something that does not quite fit, that seems to be reaching for the freedom that Gronk finds naturally and that Brady, for all his gifts and all his achievements and all his everything, has never quite had access to, because the specific weight of being Tom Brady, the greatest of all time, does not leave room for the playful absurdity that the wrestling ring requires in the same way it left room for it in Gronk. Sarah Haynes watched all of this and said what Sarah Haynes says when she is engaging with something that she finds genuinely interesting as a subject of discussion rather than simply as material for a reaction. She talked about comfort zones. She talked about the general principle of not getting out of your comfort zone, delivered with the specific quality of someone who was using the general principle as a way of saying something specific about the Tom Brady situation without saying it directly, and then added the correction that clarified what she actually meant, which was that the general principle applied to many things but not necessarily to slapping Logan Paul, and the addition of the correction produced the specific and slightly helpless laughter of the table that comes from a comment that is simultaneously obvious and funnier than it needed to be. Joy Behar had one more thing to say. She brought up the Netflix roast. She said he did that roast on Netflix and then he ended up having to apologize to the mother of his children. She mentioned Giselle living her best life, delivering the mention with the specific and slightly devastating quality of 3 words that contained an entire story. That said everything about the distance between where Tom Brady was in his post-retirement public life and where Giselle Bündchen was in her post-divorce life without requiring any additional elaboration, because the 3 words living her best life did the elaboration more efficiently than anything longer could have. And then she delivered the conclusion. He's got to stick to his lane. He's got $500 million. And the implication, left beautifully unstated, was that $500 million and the greatest career in the history of the sport were a lane so large and so rich and so thoroughly sufficient that the desire to leave it for the Logan Paul lane was something that required no further explanation than the simple statement that it was small and weird, that it was beneath him, that he was too pretty for it, and that the lane he had was a lane that most people would have been grateful to have for the rest of their lives without ever feeling the need to look at the lane next to them and wonder what was happening over there. The specific thing about Joy Behar's handling of this segment was not any single line but the sequence of lines, the way they built on each other, from the comedy of the too pretty observation to the substance of the beneath him assessment to the supporting evidence of the Gronk comparison to the final and devastating simplicity of the living her best life observation, each one adding something to the picture that the previous one had begun to draw, each one arriving from a slightly different angle, each one contributing to the specific and complete portrait of a situation that was both funny and revealing, and that the panel engaged with in the way that the view panel at its best engages with things, which was from multiple directions simultaneously with multiple kinds of intelligence applied to the same material, producing something that was more complete and more interesting than any single perspective could have been. Tom Brady will probably not wrestle Logan Paul. Or he will. The specific unpredictability of what retired athletes do with the enormous energy and the enormous competitiveness and the enormous need for the kind of engagement with the world that their sport had always provided and that retirement has suddenly removed is one of the genuinely interesting phenomena of American sports culture, the specific and human quality of someone who has organized their entire existence around a thing and then had the thing taken away not by failure but by success, and who has to find some other place to put the energy that the thing had always absorbed. Whether the wrestling ring is where Tom Brady puts that energy remains to be seen. What is not in question is that Joy Behar found the line about the energy's current direction and delivered it with the precision and the timing and the complete commitment that makes a line do all the work a line is capable of doing. He is too pretty to be a wrestler. 5 words. The studio erupted. And for the specific and unrepeatable duration of that eruption, the view was exactly what it is at its best, which is 5 women at a table being completely and brilliantly and hilariously themselves about something that the world was already talking about, but that they made everyone see differently by talking about it the way only they could.